Ready? All right, everyone. Happy Friday. Happy Aloha Friday. I hope you're feeling good with some sushi in your belly. I had a huge dollop of wasabi, and I'm feeling good. So I'm happy about it. So today I'm going to talk about propagation of Leucospermum. And before I start, I just wanted to thank you so much to HTFC, to Russell, Judy, Neil, everyone in this room. It's such an honor to be here. I always love to come to Big Island and invite new friends and see everyone and catch up. I think these events are so important so we can communicate. Everything what Allison was saying, you know, we need to communicate and connect the designers, the buyers, and the growers. All right, we will get started because I can ramble. So just a little introduction about myself. I have about 20 years of experience working with plants. I'm born and raised in Wisconsin. I worked at a farm, edible crop farm, and I also created and managed my own cut flower CSA, community supported agriculture. I'm not sure if you folks have that on this island. It's kind of a cool business model if you're a farmer. Love flowers. Was also a florist in Maui at the Four Seasons Town and Country. I love to garden and weed whack and kill weeds in my free time. It's always fun. And I also worked as a conservation planner for the Maui Soil and Water Conservation Districts in partnership with USDA NRCS. And I had the privilege of working with a lot of farmers, ranchers, and foresters and helping them best conserve their natural resources. If you are not aware of USDA NRCS, I highly recommend, if you're a grower, that you reach out to them because there are good programs for farmers who want to implement conservation practices like mulching, composting, cover cropping. They won't give you money to go into production though. But if you want to plant native Hawaiian plants, for instance, anyway, it's a good resource. They can help with funding or fencing and other things. And I also love soil. That was by Oahu. So Leeward, Maui, and they're now remapping a lot of the soils, at least in Maui County. Not sure about Hawaii Island, but that was really fun, digging in a pit, looking at the horizons. Okay, a little brief background. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in Sustainable Horticulture, love plants. After that, I farmed for a few years because I wanted to learn really hands-on experience. And then I was fortunate enough to get this job, which I love, working for UH-Manoa CETAHR. And I also got my Master's of Science in Tropical Plant Pathology while working full-time. Don't recommend that. It's very hard. In 2023. And really my interest in pathology was because of Protea, which I'll talk more about. But truly my passion is to help farmers. After being a farmer and living in a hay mound, the top of a barn, and struggling to make ends meet, it's really challenging, and it's a privilege really to be able to give back and support growers. So now I am the Ornamental Extension Agent in Maui County, so help farmers, commercial growers, and landscape professionals on the island of Maui, Molokai, and Lanai. And similar, I work with Russell and Alberto. My role is to provide science-based education, and also I conduct consultations, applied research, and most importantly, provide educational outreach to support all of you. Okay, so I just wanted to briefly mention my projects over the years. I've been in this position as an extension agent for about 6 years, I think 7 years in this October. But I'm constantly learning. I'm very fortunate and privileged to work at the Maui Agricultural Research Station in upcountry Maui and Kula, and very lucky to learn from seasoned Protea growers and experts. So Pam Shingaki taught me a lot. She was the previous farm manager. I just wanted to give a shout out and mahalo to her. as well as all the Protea growers in this room that have generously shared their information with me. But I am not a Protea expert. Just want to stress that. I'm constantly learning. And for me, you can read this stuff in a book, but to actually be working with the plants, seeing how they respond to the pruning practices and management practices is a whole other story. So over the years, I worked on pest and disease identification and management with Proteaceae, really to try to help growers, because they were reaching out to me, hey, what are these disease symptoms? What's this? Is this Alcinoi? Is this Phytophthora? And so we collected a lot of samples, many thanks to our grant sponsors, Maui OED, USDA, Maui County Farm Bureau, and the Hawaii Department of Ag. Also working on maintaining the Protea germplasm at the Kula Research Station, and also improving soil and plant health to boost the plant immunity for a disease management program. Okay, now I'm going to switch gears and talk about just a little brief botanical overview of Proteaceae. So when people say Protea, it's complicated, right? Because you're like, are you talking about pincushions? Are you talking about Leucospermum? Or Protea, which is our kings and our minks. So Protea, collectively, it depends on the context is the answer, right? Do you folks get that sometimes? Yeah. So today I'm focusing on Leucospermum, but I just wanted to mention collectively Protea can be referred to as pincushion Protea, Leucospermum, Protea, so like minks, that genus, and sometimes Leucodendron, maybe even Banksias as well. But fun fact, so Protea was named after the Greek goddess Proteus, who morphed into many shapes. I think that's pretty cool because it's such a cool old family, and we have some Protea experts in the room who should be teaching this part, not me. But they're really neat plants. They're very old plants. I think their fossil records go back to 300 million years. Native to primarily South Africa and parts of Australia. And they're very desirable cut flowers. Commercially, they're grown in South Africa, Australia, and Hawaii, California, and Europe. Yes. Okay, so a little bit about the environmental conditions. They prefer full sun, well-drained, nutrient-poor, acidic soils. Leucodendron especially is sensitive to high levels of soil phosphorus. That whole kind of family is in general, so watch out for that. They are drought tolerant once they're established, so they don't need much water. So they don't like wet feet, as I was mentioning earlier, if you were at the earlier pruning workshop. And one thing cool to note is that the temperature, so they prefer cool nights and warm days, especially more of our minks and king proteas. It's not the elevation. People always think like, oh, it's the elevation. It's the change in temperatures. That's my understanding is why some of these Proteaceae crops grow better at higher elevations. And this is an awesome book from the 80s by Kepler, but you can see in this image where Protea was historically grown. So on the Big Island in Kula, that is changing, and you can talk to Russell and Alberto and Jamie because there are now some low elevation Leucospermum UH hybrids. Okay, so now talking about Leucospermum. Leucospermum is collectively the genus called pincushions, and leucos is known as like white and sperma is seed, so you can think about it as white or light colored seeds. They are primarily native to South Africa, and they're called pincushion proteas. I say protea. Some people say different names, but I say Proteaceae, Protea. Thank you, because it's like the family, Proteaceae. There are some species that are more desirable for cut flowers, and there's several different hybrids They're woody shrubs to medium-sized trees, so they can get pretty big. And the flowers are really cool. So the reason why they're called pincushions is because each one of these, so the whole flower head, we were dissecting it earlier and playing with it, is actually an inflorescence made up of many little flowers. So each one of these pins is its own flower right here. It has this perianth right here. So basically when it's closed up before it pops open, the perianth is just covering the reproductive parts of the flower. It is a perfect bisexual flower. So when the pin pops open, the pin is the style, right? This thing. But inside of the perianth is also the anther or the pollen. So when it pops open, kabam! The pollen is usually on here. And it's got this pollen presenter.
We can't see your pointer.
Oh. Thank you.
Up on the top, the little red line there.
I'm just going to point in person. Thank you. So okay, this is the flower, the inflorescence, and each one of these is a little pin. This is kind of the ribbon, but this is the perianth. So before the pin comes out, the perianth is basically covering, there's this flower bract, so each one of these has a bract, the perianth, and then the style is the pin, that's the female part, that is wrapped up all cute. What did you call them? Toes?
Mom calls them frog toes.
Yeah, they call them frog toes. I love it. So this style lady is wrapped up in here, and then as it matures, it pops out, and it has this pollen presenter. So the anther is in here as well, so the pollen, and as it pops out, bam, there's usually pollen on the tip, also the stigma, and then it also has nectar. So Leucospermum is great if you want to attract bees and different pollinators. We constantly have bees at the station. But I just wanted to give you a brief, I'm not an expert on this, but just a brief background why they're called pins. Okay, a brief background on the history of Protea. So it was introduced in the 1960s, many thanks to Dr. Philip Parvin. And because primarily Hawaii does have some suitable environments similar to the native ranges, and primarily to help Hawaii growers participate in the global market. We can't compete with California. You guys are on it. You're huge. You can do amazing things, and you're very innovative, but we have a lot more smaller farmers, and so that's why Dr. Philip Parvin brought them in. Then there was a UH hybridization program where they met with growers and then bred and developed different hybrids. So as of today, I believe there's 200 to 300 different UH hybrids of Leucospermum. And they're great cut flowers because they ship well, they have a long vase life, and sometimes they dry very well, particularly the proteas and the minks. You can see here in the stats, unfortunately, just based on this statistical data, it does look like the protea value is decreasing across the state. But historically, it was very important. It's a valuable industry. It's a great crop. And the typical flowering period here in Hawaii it varies by hybrid and species, but it's usually between October to July. Peak is January to April, kind of right now. Okay, now we're getting into the propagation. So there's different types of propagating Leucospermum. There's seeds, there's grafting potential, vegetative cuttings, which we talked about earlier today, and then also micro-propagation. Today I'm just focusing on vegetative cuttings because that's what we've been doing. To truly, and this is the best, most economical way, my perspective, to maintain the lineage of a specific UH hybrid or plant. And there's different types of cuttings. There are terminal, subterminal, and basal cuttings, but I'm going to talk about the semi-hardwood cuttings. Okay, so as we were in the field, and thank you to all of you who participated, and thank you to Greenpoint for letting us tour and cut your plants. We appreciate that. Basically, after flowering is when you want to be scouting, even during flowering when you're pruning your plants, looking for vegetative material. You want to harvest, ideally, the vegetative cuttings that are the semi-hardwood, so they're firm, they're not too bendy, and before flowering. Then you can use liquid or powder rooting hormone and soilless media and propagate them in the greenhouse using what we do as mist irrigation. And it's very site specific, like we learned from Troy today that and also Jeremy, that you use bottom heating. I have yet to do that, but just in Maui, there's big differences in elevation, there's microclimates all over, so it's fun to experiment at different elevations and areas. So if you learned anything today, the take-home message is timing. Timing is really important for propagation. You want to collect the cuttings at the proper time when they're ready so you can maximize your rooting success. That's not to say you can't take them when they have flower buds. What we've had, and based on my experience, is higher rooting success rates when it is before budding. Before flowering, when it's actively growing vegetatively. Again, you want it firm and hard, but not too woody, slightly flexible, but it doesn't snap when you're bending. And it really depends on the plant, the genetics, the location, the timing. And ideally you want to harvest clean, disease-free materials, so about 5 to 6 inches long. And then be prepared, most likely take the cuttings in the morning and be ready to root them right away for higher chances of rooting success. And I just wanted to thank Pam for sharing this document she created about cutting and propagating of the protea plants. So you can see right here, this is a good cutting. So you take the cutting, you can put it in the cooler right away or root it right away. Take off, any disease, the lower leaves, leave some leaves there. We don't cut them in half anymore. Dip them in the rooting hormone, put them in your vegetative trays or cubes. Before you start propagating, think about what materials and supplies you need. So we use propagation trays like this that have this airspace at the bottom so the roots can develop. Some people use cubes. We use a soilless media, either peat or cocoa coir with perlite, rooting hormone. We use Clonex as well to propagate our plants. You dip them, you process your cutting, you dip it in the Clonex, and then you stick it into your pot. You want to make sure that we trim it at an angle. I was really curious to learn your method, Jeremy. And then irrigation is key. We use mist irrigation in a greenhouse with 30 to 50% shade. Full sun can be a little too much for Leucospermum. Again, it's very site specific. But we mist irrigate, I think, up to 1 or 2 minutes a day, 15-second increments. And we don't want really wet plants. You don't want them overly saturated, but you don't want them to dry out. So irrigation is key to get them to root. Sometimes it can take 6 to 9 months, sometimes even longer, especially if you're at a higher elevation or a cooler site. And then again, just the methods: harvest the cuttings. How am I doing on time? Prepare your media ahead of time. I loved what Jeremy was saying yesterday. Once you create your soilless propagative material, use it right away. Make sure it's clean. You don't want to make up a big batch and just leave it out to get exposed to different fungal pathogens in the air. So make up a fresh batch of media. We use 50% peat cocoa coir with perlite and no fertilizer. I have yet to experiment with foam cubes. I think we tried a few times. They're a little expensive, the shipping here, than just using our own soil mix. But you can do whatever you want. Prepare the cuttings, cut them at a sharp angle, strip off the lower leaves. We dip them in the hormone solution. We use the Clonex again, but you can also use liquid or powder. You stick the cutting in the media. You don't want it all the way down. You want to leave some space at the bottom of your pot so it can develop roots. And then mist irrigate. That's really important. You don't want to forget about your plants and let them dry out and die, which can happen. And then we keep our cuttings in the mist house with 30 to 50% shade. Some people have a screened-in greenhouse with to keep the birds away, because birds can be a nuisance here. Okay, so once you have roots, baby roots forming, and you can tell that if it's a propagation tray, you can just gently lift it up and look to see if you have little roots forming at the bottom, but don't hurt the roots because they're sensitive. But once you see multiple roots sticking out, you can transplant into 3-inch pots. That's what the method we do. And really the reason behind that is to strengthen the plant structure so that you have a really well-developed plant by the time you're transplanting into the field. We again use a 50% cocoa coir with perlite and a 612 fertilizer. Actually, when I first started this job, we were seeing a higher mortality rate when we were transplanting based on the old method, which used a higher concentration of fertilizer. I think it was like a 20-20-20, and they would burn and die. So I experimented. I'm like, let's try a lower concentration fertilizer, slower release, and for whatever reason, and I took a lot of data. We tested, I nerd out at this stuff, making different soil medias with fertilizers, and this treatment 10 recipe seemed to be the winner based on our data, preliminary data. Then you place it again back into the nursery, but this time less watering. You don't need the constant misting because it already has roots developed. For a few weeks, then you can place it in the full sun. You do want it to slightly dry out between waterings, not too dry though, and not too saturated. Water is key with these plants. Yes, and it can take another 2 to 6 months from the time you transplant your rooted cutting into a 3-inch pot. One quick thing that Paige will touch on more is before you plant your 3-inch rooted plants into the field, just to reiterate what Miss Paige said, is that you really want to think about the structure of your plant. And this was Paige teaching me. Thank you, Paige, for teaching me. Basically, this plant, if you just plant it into the field and don't prune it, that's just one stem. You don't have as many. You need to give it a hair trim, which is terrifying because you're like, I just have roots, my baby plant. You're so excited. But if you cut it again in half, now usually each place you cut at this stage will produce 2 to 5 new lateral shoots, and that helps you because those are now going to become branches. Like thinking about your diagram yesterday with the wax flower, this is scary, but it's really important to cut it back so that it can have good structure like Paige mentioned, and that before you even plant the plant in the field, you're giving that plant the best chance to be successful and live a happy life. Just some considerations before planting. You can always work with your local extension agent to get soil testing done. Really understand your soil texture, type, understand your water situation, maybe even get your irrigation water tested. This is really important before you plant anything, really. And there's lots of resources out there we can help you with if you want to know what your soil series is. A bunch of information is available online. Love that stuff. Also understand who is going to be your buyer. Where are you going to sell this? Are you going to sell it? Are you just growing it for funsies? What is your goal? And have a plan and a timeline, because as Paige mentioned, I think it can take 2 to 3 years from planting a plant into the field till you get ideal harvest yield. And again, think about crops suitable to your climate. It's all about choosing the right crop for your climate. Okay, I just wanted to briefly touch on this because this is my passion and background is pests and diseases of Proteaceae. And also I collaborated with Russell, who was very helpful, and many of the growers in this room. Thank you for working with me. So in 2021, several growers in Maui County and really across the state reported having pest and disease issues. Their plants were growing fine, and then boom, they would have symptoms and die like that. So other symptoms that we saw were this dieback, leaf spots, cankers, stunted growth, just the plant really wasn't growing or doing much. Also plant death and reduced yield. So really there was a need to identify, understand what are these pathogens. Is this a disease? Is it a disease complex? Is it a single pathogen, primary pathogen? What is happening? Before you implement any integrated pest management plan, it's really important to understand what is my causal agent that's causing the disease. Because again, in the disease triangle, you have your host plant, and then you have your favorable environmental conditions. So for many fungi, that is wet, humid environment, waterlogged soils, and then you have your pathogen group. So you need all three agents, if you will, for plant disease to occur. So that's why I wanted to understand what is this disease, if it is a disease. Luckily, I was able to work with USDA ARSP bark pathologists actually here in Hilo, Dr. Lisa Keith. They're phenomenal. I collected over 140 samples from the Kula Agricultural Station and from commercial growers, and had those identified, sent in for pathogen analysis. And basically, we identified 30 different fungal genera. This is not to say, this is just fungi that were associated, that we identified and isolated from samples. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is the causal agent of disease. It's just we know that it's associated with the plant. There is more information. Russell and I and the team created these publications, which has different symptoms of particular fungi and nematodes, and then also disease management. We did an in vitro fungicide trial on Proteaceae and Leucospermum, on minks, and also we did a potted plant fungicide trial as well. Would just like to thank my collaborators. And then really quick look at this. So from those 140 samples that we submitted for pathogen analysis, 30 fungal genera were isolated. And all the bolded ones, Alternaria, Cladosporum, Caletotrichum, Diaporthe or Phomopsis, Epicoccum, Mycosphaerella, Pestiloteuopsis, which also affects eucalyptus. Curious if you have that in California, in Australia. Nigrospora, Saccharata were the most common fungi that were isolated from all the samples. We did not see much Phytophthora, which is interesting because in the late 90s and early 2000s, they were seeing more Phytophthora cinnamomii, or another Phytophthora that is escaping my mind, Kauai Caletosporum maybe. Anywho, we're seeing less. That's not to mean that it's not there, but perhaps with the changing environment, we're seeing different fungi become more opportunistic pathogens. And most of these, as I mentioned earlier today, are endophytic, meaning that they can live inside of the plant materials, and opportunistic, meaning once the plant is stressed, it can live in harmony with the plant. It's asymptomatic, you don't see any symptoms, and then boom, usually what happens in Maui at the Kula station is after a period of intense rain or high humidity, we'll start to see more leaf spots and blights occurring, and then maybe perhaps the plant is just stressed and the fungi turns pathogenic. It's living in harmony with the plant is weakened, has a lower immunity, and then these fungi can cause symptoms. But the good news is, although there's a lot of different fungi, with management practices, so utilizing a combination of cultural practices, starting with clean plant material, sanitation, pruning, fungicide applications, really thinking about plant and soil health, we can manage these disease symptoms. Also, shout out to the nematodes. Well, we don't like them, but they definitely feed on, they love protea, root knot nematodes. I'm curious if you folks have nematode issues. I know anthurium growers here do. Here's the publications again. I actually printed them out if you want to take some home and just read up on more information. Am I over time? Yes. Any questions? Questions? Just a brief conclusion. Vegetation propagation of Leucospermum. It's all about timing. So monitor your plants. Prune them. Think about maintaining enough plant material if propagation is your goal. And try to maintain your plant health so you have less disease symptoms. And also, please consider growing Leucospermum. It's such a cool crop, and now you can grow it at lower elevations. And please be sure to listen to Miss Page's talks. Last thing I wanted to mention is if you have any questions, please reach out to your local extension agent. Alberto's on Oahu. Myself, I'm on Maui County, and Russell is great. He's here. And if you have specific questions about planting, pruning, maintenance, spacing, varieties, Miss Page knows everything. So contact Paige. And also, I hate to say this, but please, please, please consider reporting if you grow any Leucospermum. If you report that on the USDA NAS data, basically, if we can boost the protea value and sales as data, we can bring more money into the state to support you growers, and also so you can get your own grants to buy, tensiometers and other equipment and for your farm. So the more we can report, that really helps the entire state. Just wanted to mahalo again and acknowledge all of the awesome collaborators and Paige and Jim Hyde. Any questions?
Can you take a picture of your slide that had the publication names on it?
Yes. I'm sorry I talked too much. And I have these for you too. Did I bore you to death? It's really quiet.
Lunch lecture.
Right. You're also awake. Oh, Allison. Yes.
You mentioned reporting on the USDA survey. When they contacted me the other day, they called and they didn't ask what crop. They just want to know if it was ornamental or were they potted things. So do you have to write that in or volunteer that information?
Honestly, I don't know.
Okay.
And I wanted to ask you growers what it's like on your end. I just know what I find as these statistics.
Well, because you were mentioning making sure the surveys know, we're growing potato, and I didn't fill paperwork one out, but they were like, oh, if you have time, we'll do it over the phone. And they didn't ask specifically what I was growing. It was ornamental cuts, it was potted foliage, but there was no hey, what are you growing?
I get a mailed one every year, and then I always fill it out online.
Sure.
So I feel like I've never actually done it in person, over the phone.
This one or this one?
If you do it online or the paper version, they have all
I know, but
listed things. But
people
yeah.
like me that are busy,
Yeah, no, I'm
that might be where some of the data is not getting.
But I didn't know if you have to get on a list to get one in paper, but if you do,
I get one in paper.
Oh.
When I don't fill it out, they call me and they have me, and so I'm sure, I have nothing better to do with my time right now than talk on the phone. But they didn't give an option of what I was growing, so if other people are doing it that way, lazy like me, they might not be getting.
I don't know. Thank you for sharing. I need to find out more. Maybe Alberto knows.
I don't know why. All I know is that they send it for to the growers.
Yeah,
And the growers respond a lot.
yeah. But I found if I don't respond, they start calling me. Which
Yeah.
is funny.
Like,
because that's-
yeah, they want the data, but it is interesting if
Yeah.
they're asking
Anyway,
all of the questions, but, yeah.
I wasn't even like terribly rude, I was just like, sure, I have a little bit of time, so maybe they were condensing it, but if I'm doing that, I feel like other people probably are too.
Thank you for sharing that because I was curious what it's like on your end. But even the more we can get involved with HEFNA, HCFC, the Maui Growers, and Floriculture Collective, there's power in numbers, right? And we can all support each other by talking, sharing stories, sharing experiences, sharing knowledge. And the more we can say as a state, oh yeah, we have 12 or 20 or 30 protea growers across the state, and it's estimated this value. This, for grants, money speaks volumes, and you can usually use that to say it, to quantify, because flowers are usually forgotten, and most money is available for edible crops. Okay, Miss Page. Thank you. Sorry.